right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our ITEST webinar entitled Media Bias, the Manipulation of Faith, Science, and Technology. I'm Sebastian Mofford, Interim Director of ITEST. For those of you who are newcomers, attending one of our webinars for the first time, ITEST stands for the Institute for Theological Encounter with Science and Technology. Our organization has been active at the interface between faith and science for over 50 years, conducting conferences, seminars, workshops, and other activities that address issues, sometimes controversial, where science bears upon some religious topic. The mission of ITEST is as follows. ITEST fosters and disseminates the position that science and faith in God are complementary paths to human fulfillment. That notion of complementary paths is a cornerstone of ITEST's purpose, and we realize that it's quite at odds with the conventional view of science against faith that is often promoted in the public square. ITEST physical headquarters are at the Cardinal Rigali Center in St. Louis, the Archdiocesan Central Office Building. However, today we are coming to you via Zoom from locations in several different places and time zones. So onward then to an introduction of today's webinar. Generally, our conferences and webinars strive to bring out the unity between faith and science, which is sometimes hidden. In any individual webinar, the purpose is not to provide some right answer, but to leave our attendees in a better informed position to make their own decisions. In a sense, to frame their own questions. Today's webinar deals with media bias, the manipulation of faith, science, and technology. Now to begin, I'm going to call on the Very Reverend Peter Samuel Kuser, MSA, President Rector of Holy Apostles College and Seminary in Cromwell, Connecticut, and author of the book Catholic Apologetics, Witnessing to and Defending the Faith, to offer our opening prayer. Father Peter?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, if we can pray to the Blessed Mother to guide us to wisdom. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Our Lady, seat of wisdom.
Pray for us.
Saint Thomas Aquinas.
Pray for us.
Saint Bonaventure.
Pray for us.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so very much, Father Peter. So I'm going to spotlight our friend Dr. Redpath while I provide an introduction of him. So Dr. Peter Redpath has been a good friend of mine for the past 7 or 8 years, and I'm delighted to welcome him to this webinar. He is presently rector of the Adler Aquinas Institute, founder and former chair of the St. John Paul II Thomistic Studies Graduate Philosophy Concentration in Christian Wisdom for Holy Apostles College and Seminary. Try putting that on a business card. A CEO of the Aquinas School of Leadership, and a contributing scholar in the Thomistic Studies graduate program at the University Abat Oliba in Barcelona, Spain. Former full professor of philosophy at St. John's University, New York. Dr. Redpath has taught philosophy on the college and university level for over 52 years, in addition to courses at the Staten Island Arthur Kill Correctional Facility in New York City's Rikers Island. He was a member of the New York Press Club and editor of the Staten Island Eagle, a monthly newspaper delivered to over 130,000 houses in Staten Island. His most recent book, How to Listen and How to Speak, a copy of which I have here, was published by En route Books and Media in June 2021. Without further ado, Dr. Peter A. Redpath. Dr. Redpath, take it away.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahfoud, my friend. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this historic meeting. I've been saying that for quite a number of years at different conferences that I've been in which I've been participating, starting with ones that began in 2001 at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin, to which I had been invited to give a presentation. That subsequently got me involved in doing a couple of dozen more since then, with the goal of working with the Lublin School of Thomism. And Holy Apostles College and Seminary has had a long history of involvement with the Lublin School of Thomism. In fact, the Pope John Paul II's philosophical works were largely introduced to the United States through a former rector at Holy Apostles who had been involved in getting introduced to the United States a work from the Lublin School of Thomism. And so John Paul II was very much interested in repersonalizing philosophy and focusing attention on philosophical activity and its nature. And I consider that to be a historic event that in recovering a proper understanding of the nature of philosophy that I wanted to continue. And so I consider myself to be on a providential mission in a way to do that. And I've developed my own understanding about how best to do that, which actually had started in the 1980s with me after I'd read a work by Jacques Maritain. At the time, I was vice president of the American Maritain Association. Maritain had written one of his last works, The Peasant of the Garonne, in which he begged his readers not to take the statement he was going to make to be that of a crazy old man when he said that modern philosophy, strictly speaking, is not philosophy. And I had a lot of respect for Maritain, I still do. And I thought, well, I should investigate this and see whether he was right. And so it took me until 1997. So I worked at least I'd say a dozen years on this, and I concluded that Maritain was right. And he had said that unless you reunite philosophy and science and wisdom, well, reunite philosophy and science, that it would not be possible to have world peace, future peace. And I tried to figure out how to do that. And after a while, I figured out the only way you could do that was to reunite philosophy and science and wisdom. So I wound up writing a work on what I entitled A Not So Elementary Christian Metaphysics in 2 volumes that was published with Sebastian Mahfoud's En route Books and Media also to start that. And I've been continuing on that mission since that time. So in a way, what I'm attempting to do here is repersonalize philosophy, and in a sense, start out trying to solve this question by taking this repersonalized philosophical approach. At the beginning of his toward the beginning of his work on the heavens, Aristotle says that small mistakes in the beginning make large mistakes down the road. They multiply down the road. And what he meant by that was, if you're wrong about your principles, your principles are the starting point for your reasoning. We don't start investigations with reasoning. We start investigation with understanding and with principles. And for the most part, contemporary intellectuals do not understand the nature of a principle the way Aristotle had used this term. I was lucky when I was at St. John's University to sit across the desk a couple of feet from a brilliant Dominican. He hasn't been too well heard of. His name was Charles Bonaventure Crowley. And he spent 50 years basically studying the nature of principles in St. Thomas. He came down with spinal arthritis and wasn't able to complete a work on the Aristotelian Thomistic philosophy of measure and a correlation of the teachings of St. Thomas and that of Aristotle. And what he did was he took principles from St. Thomas related to the nature of unity. Spent 50 years studying the nature of unity and analogously transposed them into the international system of units to show how all the principles in the international system of units are analogous transpositions of the metaphysical principle of unity, and related chiefly to qualities in the contemporary world. It's a brilliant, absolutely brilliant work. So that work had a lot of influence on me. And one of the things I learned from Aristotle related to this, in relationship to this topic that we have today of media bias, the manipulation of faith, science, and technology, was that Aristotle, when he was talking about a principle, didn't mean a logical premise. Okay, one of the first principles of science is the scientist or the philosopher. To me, philosophy and science are identical, and both of them are forms of behavioral organizational psychology. They're both species of psychology. That's radically different from the way in which contemporary scholars look at philosophy in general, or people understand that, or science. But I'm convinced that this is true. That's the best way to understand what people who are involved in science or in philosophy are doing. The first principle of science is a scientist. If you were no scientist, you'd have no science. And to the extent that you cut off science from wisdom, you're not a scientist. You're a fool. You don't need to be a genius to show that that anybody who does that has no proper understanding of the nature of human understanding or knowledge in its most excellent form. Right? So I dismiss that notion just on that basis. That principle that Aristotle articulates indicates that when we use the word principle, we're using it analogously. We're predicating analogously, and chiefly we simply mean a starting point, that from which we begin our reasoning. Now, if you don't understand anything, if you don't know anything, evidently you can't begin your reasoning. And one of the biggest mistakes that modern thought has made since the 17th century is to think that you have to prove your first principles. That's absolutely absurd. Your first principles are evident truths. You know that evidently that it is the case. For example, that you know what you're talking about. If you claim that you have to prove everything, how are you going to prove that you know what you're talking about before you start talking to somebody? How are you going to prove that to them? Science is conversational. Philosophy, as identical with science, is also, both of them are conversational. We transmit them in terms of media, as the title of this today's meeting, today's presentation indicates. So Aristotle always starts his investigations with defining his subject matter, right? Which is the way I'm going to proceed. I never write out what I'm going to talk about, and I don't really like talking from written lectures. What I do is I start with the definition, and I analyze the parts of the definition and the implications that are found in the definition. And when you're talking about, my approach is going to be more abstract and historical than Tom Sheahen's approach, which is they're good complements. He's going to take a different angle on helping the members of the audience understand contemporary media bias. I'm approaching this more or less on an understanding of the nature of bias. Considering as philosophers are inclined to do, what is the nature of this subject considered universally. So wherever you find it, you find this. Now, there are two words that are used in this title that are especially interesting related to this. One is, three, media, and bias and manipulation. Right? These are all first principles of our understanding. If we don't understand these correctly, we're going to get in all sorts of difficulty resolving the problem. A media can be any kind of means, but we're talking chiefly of a means of communication, what modern call two-way talk, conversational speaking, rather than simply one-way talk or lecture. Those involved in the media tend to understand themselves as intermediaries between one thing and another thing, or one being and another being. And bias indicates unjust discrimination. So media bias, abstractly considered, is very easy to identify, at least in general, that it's a kind of unjust discrimination. Right? Now, since injustice, since prudence, if we accept what Aristotle says about this in St. Thomas, and common sense, the prudence is the form of all virtues. To the extent that you're not doing something prudentially, you're not applying whatever virtue you have at the right time and in the right situation, for example, in the right place. When I was at St. John's, I had a lot of Italian students in my classes. I'd have a lot of Irish students in the classes. And I would always caution my Irish students never to go to an Italian wake and sing Danny Boy to express your condolences. That if you did that, you would be lacking in common sense. And prudence is just a form of common sense. It's what's commonly known, commonly understood to be a starting point. It involves understanding your first principles. A person with no common sense, who can't act prudentially, doesn't know the principles that everybody else who knows the subject applies. Right? And in a situation to be able to reason out and draw a proper conclusion about some difficulty confronting a person. So common sense is pretty much an easy concept to grasp. Most of us have none of it most of the time because we're not familiar with a lot of things. Most of the things with which everybody else is familiar all over the world. We have a very narrow area in which we have this, and when we try to deal with a new problem, we first have to define our subject matter so that we're dealing with it from the standpoint of common sense, what anybody who knows about this subject understands to be taken for granted. These are assumptions that we don't have to really investigate. Now, manipulation can refer to misusing something, or it can simply refer to integrating. And I think that ITEST probably in coming up with this topic focused attention on the misuse rather than the integration, but they're not but they're not totally entirely divorced. That there's still that sense that how are we integrating at the same time as we might be misusing the relationship among these different psychological habits of faith and science and technology. Okay, now so that was one of the first principles I'm using. Okay, and I can answer the question very easily about what's the cause of media bias. If we're talking about it in a universal and kind of abstract way, it's not applying justice and prudence in the reporting of what's going on. Right? If we're talking to modern media in the sense of communications media, like radio and television and print media, but it's if we want to understand it in more detail and why it's widespread. Okay, what makes media bias so widespread and entrenched today that it creates in its those who have it a kind of tunnel vision, right? Where today we use contemporary terms like a reductionism, where a person reduces the whole of a genus to one of its species and superimposes on the genus the characteristics of the species, or where people can't think outside the box. We sometimes talk about it today as a tunnel vision, a beltway mentality. I often, if you're talking about really intelligent people doing this, I call these people who are encyclopedias open to the wrong page. This type of psychological attitude on the part of people causes them to reject the reality of truth. In the sense that there is some sort of they're in some sort of external relationship between parts and wholes in the things around us, which, as far as I understand, anything we understand in terms of organizations, and when we define them to try to explain, make intelligible to others what we're talking about, we locate them in a genus and a species, if we can't, if we're imprecise in being able to communicate what we're talking about, it's precisely because we don't have our definitions correct. So you always have to. This is why Aristotle always starts off defining a subject matter, because as St. Thomas says, the whole of a science is contained in its principles. And its principles are contained in its definitions, because the definitions of a thing contain the nature of the thing, and the nature of a thing is its organization. And the organization of a thing, the way parts harmonize to organize into an organizational whole, enable you to understand the actions that are being generated by that organization. You deny the reality of natures and things, which so many contemporaries do. You'll deny the reality of organizational behavior. Right? And if you deny the reality of final causes, which so many people do today, you can't explain the nature of organizations, because organizations that are aimless have no, they're not organizations. They're anarchic. And in a sense, all media bias today, in general, entrenched, is reducible to this mistake that was made in the 17th century of trying to get rid of the notion of aims in things and organizational wholes, and say that we can't really understand them. We can't comprehend their behavior, or if we can, the only people who can do it are mathematical physicists, and everybody else, you just have opinion, and so there is no truth in that. There's only truth in scientific positivism. That's, in a nutshell, the main problem that we're faced with today. Scientific positivism rejects the reality of truth, or reduces it to mathematical physics, It tends to argue that what can't be proven can't possibly be true. There's no evident truth unless you can prove it. They've got no proof for this claim that the whole of truth is reducible to mathematical physics, because they don't demonstrate that by means of numbers and so forth. They do it in terms of ordinary speech and so forth. This leads to all sorts of cultural difficulties. So the second principle I work with in attacking this problem is one that was made by Etienne Gilson. And he thinks over the centuries, somehow he got that. It transferred to him from the dramatist Menander, who once said that we live life the way we can, not the way we choose. And Gilson remarks that we think the way we can, right? And not the way we wish. And I extend that to also not the way we choose. Once you would lay down your philosophical principles, Gilson says, and you try to apply them to the real world, very often people find that the principles are not able to explain how something that you're talking about, your subject, operates or can operate in the real world. It doesn't make them intelligible. And so the test of truth that we actually give to whether or not our principles are right is whether or not they actually can generate action, cause action. And make action intelligible to us in the real world, which makes sense because this is what the ancient Greeks were. If you think that philosophy in the West starts with the ancient Greeks were chiefly interested in action and trying to make it intelligible in terms of the principles of the one and the many, the problem of the one and the many, which many people in philosophy reduce to a problem of ancient physics, but it was actually the problem in philosophy for the whole of antiquity and remained the problem of philosophy, which Gilson himself didn't see to some extent. Gilson focused attention on the nature of existence and how important that was in making things intelligible, which is totally correct. It was a genius move on his part. The only problem is that it doesn't really relate too much to what you're doing in science, because science, people who are investigating scientifically are interested in the behavior of organizational wholes and how their parts can be integrated to produce action or not produce it, how you can unite and divide organizations, and leaders especially have to know this. So if you don't understand the nature of organizations and the way they operate and how truth is related to that, and how you can apply that properly, you totally destroy the understanding of the nature of leadership, which is what modern thought, contemporary thought has largely done, and which I'm trying to reverse. So investigations, as Aristotle says, that they have to start with this definition of the subject matter and being as precise as possible as you can in that. And defining the subject matter, what you're doing is you're defining yourself in relationship to it. When I started class, whenever I start courses, I ask people precisely who they are and where they are and why they're there and where they're going, right? And I do that to put them in a real genus, because we always think and choose in relationship to our understanding of what is a real genus, which I identify with an organization, an operational organization. And simultaneously, we belong to a lot of different genera. We're human beings. We can be a brother or sister, mother or father. We can be somebody who's at work, in our office. We can be moving in between. We can be driving, in which case we're a driver, and so forth, right? And we have to keep these different organizational relationships in which we're involved, which are our situations. Another way to understand what the nature of a genus is the way I understand it. A real one. It's our situation. If you take St. Thomas's traditional 8 acts, which he gets from Aristotle, that are the circumstances or conditions of a moral act, they're the circumstances or condition of any act. Who is doing what, to what, with what, where, why, when, and how. Right? If you know that, you know your situation. You know an organization. Whenever you act, someone is acting, and those who, what, and why, and so forth, and to what. Those are Aristotle's 4 causes. You take Aristotle's 4 causes, and you add time and place, and you add instrument to that. And you come up with the notion of a real genus. Whenever we're acting in time and place, right? We're applying different causes. Those causes are principles, and they either generate action or they don't generate action, but you have to know how to harmonize all of these activity, because an organization exists in the harmony of its parts. Or where does a genus exist? Where does a real genus exist? Etienne Gilson, in one of his last works, 3 Tasks in Philosophy, talks about species. And he says species exist in zoos, among other things. Real species exist in zoos. But this is amazing. This man was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And he understood that you couldn't understand philosophy unless you understood the notion of genus and species, because the ancient problem of the one and the many was a problem of how genus and species are related. And he said he didn't know the answer to that. Which means he didn't know what philosophy was, which was true. He didn't, precisely as he admitted, and he did in a way, but he didn't. And one of the things that got me in trouble in trying to understand philosophy and trying to understand this question, how to approach it, is that Gilson misled me by making a statement which seemed to me to be right on the money. He said that most philosophical mistakes start from badly framed questions. And another one he made in relationship to that was that philosophy always buries its undertakers. Right? People that had philosophical experience. He wrote this work on the unity of philosophical experience, and he said people with philosophical experience, if they observe history, they'll recognize that philosophy always buries its undertakers. And I recognize, sure, that's true if you don't understand philosophy correctly. And the only reason for that is because the nature of things buries its undertakers. If your understanding of philosophy is Hegel, it's not going to bury anybody's undertaker. It's going to be the undertaker, or Kant. You try to apply those principles to reality and live them out, you'll go mad very often. So I said, no, Gilson was wrong. He's wrong there. Most philosophical and scientific mistakes start with not knowing what you're talking about. And I didn't realize that until I had been invited to give a paper and organize a conference at the Sorbonne in 2018 for the International Etienne Gilson Society for the 150th anniversary of the beginning of the École Pratique des Hautes Études at the Sorbonne. And so I gave this presentation on Gilson's notion of Christian philosophy and had to explain why I thought Gilson had misunderstood the nature of Christian philosophy. Misunderstood in the sense that he couldn't make it intelligible. So he understood it. He understood it. Just like a person who go into a pizzeria and say, "And this is fantastic pizza. What's the nature of pizza?" And somebody, they'll think they suppose that they'd have to know this precisely, but they don't really. In order to be able to be great at what they were doing, Gilson was great at what he was doing, but he had difficulty articulating what he was doing because he was emphasizing the notion that philosophy is a body of knowledge or a system, logical system of ideas, and you express this body of knowledge of essences, right? And once they leave your mind, they enter the mind of someone else. They take on a life of their own, which is might be radically different from that which existed in your mind. I noticed that with my students, for example, that I would very often say things in class, and once they entered the minds of my students, and they were reported back to me, they became unrecognizable to me. I thought, and like Father Crowley used to say, I'm a failure. It just admitted, well, you can, you can do the best that you can. But anyway, so the biggest problem is not philosophical problem, is not precisely knowing what we're talking about, right? And how we can talk about it to make it understandable, comprehensible to other people. That's one of the reasons why I wrote this book on how to listen and how to speak, which was a reinterpretation of a work by Mortimer J. Adler on how to speak and how to listen, right? Which Adler wrote really not to understand the nature of rhetoric or communications, but to explain how philosophy is uncommon common sense, and how rhetoric is a kind of a division of philosophy which is essential for communicating common sense, and that rhetoric, in the sense of a philosophical discipline that inculcates the habit of prudence in students, in terms of docilitas, teachability. If someone is not teachable, is unable to listen to what another person is saying, because they can't pay attention to, or not even familiar with the fact that to understand what somebody's saying, and to be able to judge it impartially, like a social scientist should do, an organizational psychologist, you have to do that by abstracting from your emotions and trying to understand the definitions that people are using and the way that they're ordering these definitions to arrive at the conclusions they're doing. If you don't start out that way, if you don't start out talking about the same thing, the same subject, in the same way, right? You're not in the same genus. Right? And I started to realize this actually in preparing this paper for the Sorbonne, reading work by Father Armand Maurer, the great Basilian Thomistic scholar, where he said for St. Thomas Aquinas, philosophy, first of all, is identical with science, and that it's not a system or body of knowledge. Chiefly, it's not a logical system. It's not a body of knowledge. It's a psychological habit. And I said, "Oh my God, Father Maurer just has made this genius observation, and he never capitalized on it. He didn't realize what he was saying. He was saying the whole of philosophy is a psychological discipline. It's a psychological activity. Yeah, you can't reunite philosophy and science and wisdom, and get away from media bias and all of these other problems." Unless you do this as an impartial social scientist, which Mortimer J. Adler understood. Adler understood that because he was so obnoxious as a youth at Columbia College, they wouldn't even let him go into the graduate philosophy program. They banned him to psychology. Okay. So anyway, Joseph Pieper, this gets me on to Joseph Pieper, among other people. There were a bunch of people who were trying to solve this repersonalization problem in philosophy, going back to the beginning of the 20th century, all right? And they included Joseph Pieper. I'm going to mention some. I mentioned John Paul II after World War II, and you have Gabriel Marcel, Yves Simon, Jacques Maritain, Georges Bernanos, Jules Sand, Romano Guardini, Brennan Manning and his ragamuffin gospel, the Southern agrarian movement, people like Flannery O'Connor, Thomas Merton, Stanley Yaki, among others. They all recognize that to some extent a proper solution to the problem lay in recovering the liberal arts, and the only problem is recovering the liberal arts the way it's taught today to solve this problem very often to people means being able to establish order in schools, periodically meeting to smoke cigars and drink fine wine, memorize Aquinas and understand, some things in Aquinas and understand, and be able to indicate where his principles of natural law are in his Summa Theologia, which to me is not really what's involved in recovering a proper understanding of this our situation and how to solve it. It actually resides in Joseph Pieper's grossly mistranslated book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, because that's not the title of the book in German. The title of the book in German is Musse und Kult, Leisure and Religion. Right? And Pieper is not saying that that leisure is the basis of culture. He's saying, or cult, religion. He's saying religion is the basis of leisure. Right? In fact, he starts this book out, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, with this quote from Plato that but the gods, taking pity on mankind, born to work, laid down the succession of recurring feasts to restore them from their fatigue, and gave them the Muses and Apollo, their leader, and Dionysius as companions in their feasts, so that nourishing themselves in festive companionship with the gods, they should again stand upright and correct. And quoting from Psalms, "Be still and know that I am God." In other words, philosophy, science always begins in religion, because that's where your metaphysical and your moral principles are taken. Yaki understood this in a way when he said science was born of Christianity, meaning science, modern science, in the reductionistic sense of mathematical physics, arose from Catholic universities in Europe. That's totally correct. But strictly speaking, science for the ancient Greeks begins with gods. It begins with inspiration. When Socrates on trial in the Apology talks about his justification for his activity, he talks about the oracle at Delphi and says the oracle at Delphi had sent him on a divine mission. The people in media today have no understanding of the nature of the relationship between religion and culture. They think culture is something simply arbitrary. It was created by science. The people who run the media, they're interested in making money. The people who work for them, they're interested. They think that somehow or other that they are like the oracle at Delphi, that they know what science is, because everybody else that they hang around with, wherever they're going, they all accept what each feels, because they've moved truth out of the human intellect. Descartes did this in book 4 of his Meditation on First Philosophy, where he says that falsity is contained in the will, in a will that causes a wild imagination. Well, if that's true, that's where truth is located also. They're contrary opposites. They're located in the same genus. The will to power starts with Descartes. These people think that they have sincere wills, that they've reduced the emotions to feelings, and they all accept the same feelings. And so one of the worst kinds of bias is not knowing that you're biased. It's that bias in your principles. Descartes claimed that he was following Renaissance humanists and maintaining that the whole of philosophy had been historically transmitted, right? From religion, from the Jews. In getting rid of philosophy and saying that was all backward, what happens historically is the Jews become responsible for all of the bad things that have happened since that time, because they had a false understanding of science. That's it. Amen. Tom, take over.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Redpath. So we'll now transition to Tom Sheahen, and let me spotlight him and then provide an introduction. Dr. Sheahen was director of the Institute for Theological Encounter with Science and Technology, that's our group ITEST, from 2008 to 2021, and one of the co-founders of the Apologetics concentration in the MA in Theology program at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. He has written frequently on faith science topics, stressing their compatibility. Sheahen authored the textbook Introduction to High Temperature Superconductivity. Tom is chairman of the Science and Environment Policy Project, SEPP. Established in 1990, its mission is to challenge government environmental policies based on poor science. The group stands for objective science based on hard evidence. In this work, Tom has dealt firsthand with publication bias regarding scientific papers. Dr. Sheahen holds a BS and PhD degrees in physics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and is preparing to publish his latest book entitled Every When, God, Science, and Time. Tom, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And welcome to everyone. I hope you're enjoying this webinar. And my presentation is going to be devoted mostly to the mechanics in real television situations, but certainly it applies to things like Facebook and Twitter as well. And so let's see, I believe I've been able to share my screen. So the title of my presentation is called Understanding the Patterns of Consistent Media Bias. And the reason I'm talking about patterns is because it is something that recurs from one station to another, from one media to another. So what I intend to talk about is my outline. First of all, begin with a discussion of the purpose of the media, then to talk about their primary strategy, which in 2 words or less is to retain the audience. That's critical. There are secondary consequences, one of which is that your agenda is successful and that you make a difference. Notice that I've called that secondary, and it really is. That the primary purpose is overrides, and the secondary purpose has to satisfy that. So from a media point of view, if you're running a station, the optimum results is very simple. It's to increase sales, meaning sales of advertising, or increase the number of subscribers or something like that. If you're Facebook or somebody like that, you want to have lots of people participating, watching, and buying the products that are advertised on your network. So let's talk about the purposes of the media. First of all, the owners have a purpose, and that is profit. That's what they're in business for. That's what they want to do. Secondly, the manager has a goal that meets the owner's goal, and that is to get good ratings, to get lots of people watching. The broadcasters who are in front of the camera, they want to have influence. They want to be credible. They want to be believed by the people watching. Now, the workers, that is, those who prepare the text, who line up the information, who pick the people coming on, they want to have impact. So you see these 4 different goals are there: profit, ratings, influence, impacts, at the level of 4 different categories of people. And what you have to do is make sure they all line up together in order to have a successful enterprise. So your primary objective then, if you're the owner, just ask this question: is the business a financial success? That's basic, okay? That's where it starts. The manager has a more complicated objective. First of all, get the viewer to stay with your station. As I say here, don't touch that remote. And you have to have a delicate balance in order to convey urgency and do this. They're about to come to a commercial break, and the announcer says, and right after the break, we're having the most important person in the world, so stay tuned. So that's the balance you have to have. There's got to be a punchy message, because otherwise, as soon as the commercials start, your viewer is going to change channels. You don't want that. So that's primary. Here's the secondary objectives. From a broadcaster's point of view, the question to him is, or her, does the audience believe me? That's very important, to be credible. And I call the workers, that is the people who put together the show, they wonder, can our agenda prevail? Will we be convincing? Will people go for what we are saying? Now, when you have an agenda, you've got to devise a narrative, a way to say it. And anybody can have an agenda, but the question is which one is going to succeed. You want two criteria to succeed. You must make your audience angry and afraid. Remember Chicken Little? The sky is falling. Sky is falling. Run around. Get people alarmed, afraid. And then the other half of that is, I'm the only one who can fix it. Therefore, send money. That's what a fundraising letter essentially says. No matter which side of the political aisle it comes from, that's the way they construct fundraising letters. Well, in the media, you have to do something similar. You have to keep your message short and simple. It's really got to be brief, because your audience has a short attention span, and there's a very short time between commercials. You're going to have your announcer and the guests on screen for maybe 2 minutes before there's a commercial break. So that's a criteria that it's got to be short and simple. You have to have a memorable punchline. If your punchline isn't something that people recognize, they're going to change channel. You know, it's a reality of the way the interaction takes place between the media and the audience. And so you have to be a memorable punchline. And then to make your agenda work, your narrative has to say, take action. Get the person involved. Join our cause. Believe what we say. Do what we say. Join our cause. Be one of us. Be a member of our team. Now, to do all this, the primary strategy begins with the idea that you first have to identify the audience. And if you know your audience, then you can tailor your message to them. Well, keep them angry and afraid. Cornerstone of any agenda-driven communication. And indeed, if they aren't angry and afraid, there's a good chance they're going to change channels as soon as the commercials come on. So this pattern is consistent across the board. Republican, Democrat, whoever, they all have that same point of view, as the audience has to be kept in this agitated state. No matter what your agenda is, you want to sell the message that our team is your team. Trust us. We are your trusted guide, and we have the answers. And of course, stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages. So the question is, can we hold the audience? A good strategy, a good narrative will indeed hold the audience. And that is the definition of success when you're running a media outlet. There was a gentleman way back in 1971, wrote a book called Rules for Radicals, which is a nasty book. The guy even dedicated it to Lucifer, for heaven's sakes. But he had a number of rules of telling you how to do things. And one of them was never go outside your own range of expertise. Another was, on the other hand, go outside the expertise of the enemy. So this is a way you keep your opponents off guard, because you are going outside their range and they don't know how to respond. But you got to be careful not to go outside your own range of expertise. One of Alinsky's most important insights into human nature was he recognized that ridicule is man's most potent weapon. If you can make your opponent or enemy look ridiculous, then you've got success right there. And so that's a cornerstone of what you do. Another thing you want to do is make sure it's enjoyable for your own people, because you want to have teammates and they've got to have fun and enjoy it. And but if it's a burden upon your own people, then you tend to lose people. So making it enjoyable for your own people is important. And then you want to avoid the label old news. If the name Clinton comes to your mind over about a 20-year period, the dismissal of accusations with the term old news worked really well. And in today's day and age, with the viewers that you have to look at, you have to be careful not to become old news. Another thing you want to do is to keep the pressure on and attack constantly. Attack, attack, attack. Think of the previous political administration by Donald Trump. The attacks were coming all the time, over and over again. In the present administration, there are attacks coming against Joe Biden's cognition and so forth. And by repeating these attacks again and again, you keep the pressure on. And that keeps the viewer attentive to your issue. Then, one of Alinsky's great lines was, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. And he was saying that it's a whole lot easier to criticize a person than it is to criticize some diffuse movement or some kind of vague group. That to personalize the attack works a whole lot better. So these rules for radicals that Alinsky stated have been embodied and utilized quite well by the media over the last several decades. It's been 50 years since Alinsky's book, and people have learned from it. They've learned how to do it, and they've learned how to manipulate public opinion by applying these rules. Now, one thing that happens in the media is the problem of groupthink. Everybody the same. To get away with groupthink requires a passive audience. However, the audience is passive. They're television watchers, or they're people with some free time that are fooling around on Twitter or Facebook or something. The receptiveness of the audience is something you can pretty much count on. So, what do? You begin with some phrase like sources say, and then you complete the sentence any way you want. Okay? This is very seldom challenged. It's a slogan line that catches on and it brings you into your particular topic. But when you do this sort of thing, beware of straying off the reservation, as the old slogan goes. This is a cornerstone of groupthink, that you must make sure that you are not too far away from your main theme and what your audience is comfortable with. So you mustn't try to do something really unusual. But when you do it right and people accept it, the audience accepts it, then your reward for that is gratifying, and it reinforces your message too. Now multiply this by half a dozen TV channels and they find that they can get along quite well by repeating this same message, even though it might be flimsy at the sources say level. You've got something rolling and being enforced. And the nice thing about it is, if it is working and it's accepted, you can do it again tomorrow. You can keep pushing your narrative again and again and again because of the advantage of groupthink. If people are familiar with something, they believe it, and they believe ancillary things that go along with it. Now, in terms of doing away with your opponent, one of the greatest words that has been used excessively in recent times is debunked. When you say something was debunked, that works. It's a very useful word, It's applicable almost everywhere. Anything you don't like from the opponent, call it debunked, and by golly, you instantly dismiss the opponent's argument. And I recall here Alinsky's last rule, number 12, about personalizing and polarizing the target. So debunked is a great way to ditch the other guy's thing. And you don't need to prove anything or provide supporting evidence. You just say whatever he said, the opponent, was debunked, and then you move on. And that's very often used these days in a number of ways, with just small variations. Now, who do you put on TV? Okay, the old slogan goes, "If it bleeds, it leads." That's been a media slogan for 2/3 of a century. That's what gets the viewer to watch. And you want to put on someone that the audience can identify with. So if you can find somebody who is clearly an underdog, is being oppressed in some way, that's good. If you can also play the race card, well, that's all the better. Here's an example in very recent, the last couple of weeks. And this comes from the conservative side, actually. They are showing irate parents at school board meetings. There was one recently where a lady of Chinese heritage had lived under Mao's China, and she spoke at the school board meeting telling that their system was just like living under Mao. Another person, a black man, talked about the failure of his school board. Another was an ordinary white woman, and so forth. And the message, remember, we have an audience that you want to accept this message. The message is, you can do this in your town. So now you've got something that your viewers are on board with, identified with, and like. Another example is a person who's been hassled by police because you want the viewer to ask, well, what if this happened to me? You know, this is something of concern. I'm going to watch this. This is interesting. And the other thing you can do is put on an authority figure, somebody who will say, we've got it right, we're in charge, you can't interfere. And for the past year and a few months, probably the number one authority figure that fits in this line would be Dr. Fauci, because he was so credible, so believable, that everybody in the nation went along with him. Now, in the last month or so, Dr. Fauci has fallen from grace and there's controversy, but for a long time, he very well fit the image of an authority figure. And think of anything you want to broadcast at all, having that authority figure is the way to convince people about it. Now, what do you show on TV as contrasted to who do you put up there? You want to send out themes that reinforce popular beliefs. You begin with something that is already widely believed. Pick one. The Yankees might win the championship. New England Patriots are a great team. Government is wasteful. Politicians are all crooks. Any statement you want that's widely believed, kind of at the cliche level, you then bring in some celebrities to endorse this point of view, this very limited and widely believed thing. And sports figures, movie stars will do just fine. Then you stick in your new assertion, the thing that you're selling. Well, you've linked it to this previously widely believed statement. And so by implication, the celebrity endorsement carries over to you, and you have been able to imply the celebrities endorse your new statement. And frankly, endorsement is more important than explanation, because you might have perfect truth that you could explain with great clarity, and it would take you 20 minutes. There isn't that much time. The endorsement is what will sell it. You have to keep the sound bites short, and if you don't, you come to a commercial break, and that's where your viewers go away. So what you do is you get from the widely believed thing to the new assertion to the state that you claim everybody knows that. And thus you have blended in your new assertion in a very convincing way that gets across to the audience in this, even though it may not even be true, doesn't matter. You've got the implied endorsement, you've got the sense of authority and so forth. So you've got the viewers on board. They're part of the team. Your viewers are with you on this, and they're on a roll with you. Now, what you don't show on TV, okay? This is equally important. And indeed, if you violate it, hey, commercial, change the channel. Simple as that. There are things you can't show for fear of losing viewers. So there's views that oppose the accepted orthodoxy. Where did the COVID-19 virus come from? Was it from a wet market? Did it escape from the Wuhan lab? For a long time, the wet market theory prevailed, and the excuse was always the claim that it was from the Wuhan lab was debunked. So it's over with, off the screen, goodbye. But on the other hand, now the Wuhan lab theory is rising in ascendancy, and you have to have some other change in the way you express it. The word debunk doesn't work this time. Over in the realm of climate change, I should tell you that the four initials CAGW stand for catastrophic anthropogenic global warming, which means mankind causes it and it's really bad news. Well, the actual science of this is way too complicated. It has to do with ocean evaporation, cloud formation, and radiation, and variations in the sun, and 1,000 things like that. And nobody among your viewers is going to sit still for this. It's a kiss of death to try to explain this, and because people glaze over, the commercial comes, and they change channels. So instead, you just blame it all on carbon dioxide, and you. If somebody opposes that, your claim of carbon dioxide, you just say, oh, their theory has been debunked. By golly, it works every time. There was, about a year ago, the October surprise put forth by the Republican side in the campaign, the Hunter Biden laptop story. You may recall that he dropped off a laptop at some repair place and forgot about it. About a year and a half later, the guy turned it over to eventually the New York Post, who ran quite a story, and it was about to affect the political campaign in a strong way because it was a genuinely scandalous story. What Hunter Biden had done was really bad. However, the mainstream media dismissed it. The dismissal, which you saw Joe Biden repeat on TV many times, was the simple slogan, Russian disinformation, which is a variety of the word debunk. And again, from a point of view of TV, that works. And it's a successful technique. So what are the results that you want to have? Okay. As I told you, the goal of the owners is simply profit. But here it is from the manager's point of view. First, you have to maximize the number of eyeballs. Who's watching? That's what's going to be counted by these surveys and statistics, and that will determine whether or not you can sell more airtime commercials. Also, you want to be able to charge more per minute. And I say, think about the Super Bowl, which is very costly on a per minute basis because they know so many people are watching. So, if you don't achieve these results as a manager, the owner will hire somebody else. That's pretty simple. And for all of you who are employed and work somewhere, you will recognize the term performance evaluation, which is usually done for you once a year. But that's what's on the line from the manager's point of view. His performance has to do with selling airtime, maximizing eyeballs. So that's where his focus is going to be in terms of how to run the media and what to show. So there are certain practical consequences of getting this done in a real environment. First of all, you got to think about the split in time. The content is probably 2/3 of the time and about 1/3 commercials, okay? And that varies. At the beginning of the show, you go almost total content for at least the first 10 minutes, maybe the first 15 minutes before you slip in commercials. But towards the end of the hour, commercials are a whole lot more frequently. And sometimes you can get away with as little as 56% content and 44% commercials. That's a statistic I just built myself by watching TV on various channels, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, the mainstream, ABC, so forth. To reach that high a fraction of commercials is dangerous because you start to invite people that after they've sat through 5 commercials to change the channel because they don't want to see just one more. But at any rate, if you can retain your advertisers, or the way you retain your advertisers is by counting the eyeballs. And you tell the advertisers, don't change the advertising method, change the product. It works better. You can use advertising techniques even though you've changed products and you're selling something different, but you still use the same pitch. Now, you have to remove anything that is offensive. Well, what does offensive really mean? To the manager, the owner, and so forth, it means it loses advertisers. That you want to avoid. From those point of view of those who think up the agenda and create a narrative, things that are offensive is whatever disagrees with our narrative. And that is viewpoint discrimination. That's where censorship comes in. That's where we are looking at real problems today in the way information is disseminated. So you want to expand the audience. That is very crucial, especially in social media. I'm talking Facebook, Instagram, and all the others. Get more and more people involved. And what you want people to do is to buy in to your agenda. So your narrative has to be good, and you don't want your narrative polluted by anything that disagrees with it. Well, there are secondary consequences of conducting the media this way. First of all, you divide people into us versus them, and you want your followers to be part of us. After all, if they were part of them, they'd be watching a different channel. So this us versus them attitude is obviously a variety of polarization. There are different affinity groups. What do you try for? Victims versus oppressors. Small constituencies arise to importance. I indicate the LGBTQ people there. They're about 1% of the population. You know, blacks are 13%, Hispanics are 10%, Chinese and Orientals are another percent. How in the world could such a tiny fraction gain such power? Well, they do. They're disproportionately powerful given to these various affinity groups thanks to their proper use of Alinsky's rules for radical. They've done all the things that Alinsky told them to do. One good example of this is those 4 far-left congresswomen, AOC and others, known as the Squad. The proportional amount of influence they have is well, their influence is way out of proportion. They're much too grandiose for their total amount of their actual constituency. The numbers aren't there, but their influence and power is there. Well, from the point of view of running a station or a channel, you have to be careful about a balancing act here. Because if you start to lose viewers, then you've lost the battle. So there is political polarization that is caused by this disparity in the media. And one of the things that happens because of political polarization is that a primary election brings voters from the wings of the party, not the centrists. And this is why you wind up with candidates facing each other in November who come from the extremes of their party rather from the center. And it's all traceable back way through the whole chain to the media bias things like division into us versus them, and all these sort of things that have been taking place for several years beforehand to build up that polarization. Now, here's an example of polarization. What you do is you make some garish, shocking claim, something really gets people's attention. In this example, I picked from the right side of the spectrum. You see their red voice media, or the people that put it out. They claim that magnetism was being injected in the vaccine, okay? Now, from a science point of view, it's completely bogus. It's absolutely worthless. They don't know anything about magnetism. They don't know about the behavior of metals or anything like that. It's just a complete nonsense claim. However, it does have the advantage that it helps solidify the angry and afraid objective, because the claim that you are being manipulated in some way makes people both angry and afraid. So it works. People believe this for totally emotional and political reasons, among other things, reasons that have nothing to do with magnetism. You know, it's something you could say you've been injected with cells from a Martian or whatever. People believe this stuff because it fits the angry and afraid objective. And so I think that's a ridiculous example, but unfortunately, that kind of example, that category, the garish, shocking claim, is what gets readily believed. And by the way, from the manager and the owner's point of view, it keeps viewers paying attention. We long for the good old days. Once upon a time, there was something called brand recognition, where a guy like Ronald Reagan was identified with General Electric Theater for many years. In more recent times, a few decades ago, Arnold Schwarzenegger was known as the Terminator. These are the guys that win elections because of a favorable association. Okay? Their face, their name means something favorable, entertaining, Terminator, to the viewer, and so it's a positive, and it really helps. Nationwide loyalty to TV anchors was one of the great features of the good old days. Broadcasts would be on screen for many years. The names of Edward R. Murrow, Walter Cronkite, Huntley Brinkley Report. These are grand examples from the past, but unfortunately, those good old days have gone. The reason is there's so much polarization, and among other things, the person in front of the camera changes pretty often. Nobody lasts as long as Walter Cronkite, for example. Lester, Holko, whatever, these people just aren't there for that long. So people wish there could be unity, but if you think about the situation of either the 2016 election or the 2020 election, there is no unity. There's tremendous polarization. People are miles apart. Success story, example here, you affect national policy. In the 1970s, it was the TV that got the American people behind the movement to get out of Vietnam. And indeed, nowadays, any ground combat situation is very bad. We like to watch TV clips of drones blowing up the bad guys, but nobody wants, or the military realizes not to give footage of ground combat to the TV people. On global warming, there are now national goals for the year 2050 that are based on the Paris Accord. And I just quickly point out that every one of these things is based on a computer output, a printout from somebody's computer program. But we're going to have higher spending, new regulations, and so forth, all because of the success of the way this has been portrayed on the media with blame it all on carbon dioxide, don't think any further. To swing an election. There were presidential debates introduced in the days of Kennedy and Nixon, and basically it helped Kennedy win. But over the years, candidates got better and wised up and realized how they could manipulate the debates. Now there's this debate commission that is going to set the rules and so forth. But The elections have become popularity contests, beauty pageants, and things like the platform and the issues that you run on are secondary. And that is ridiculous, but it is a result of the way things are presented on the media. So to wrap up, again, just to review a few things I've said, advertising revenue is the primary goal. This is what we're in business for. You have to retain the viewers. If you lose the viewers, if they change the channel, you've lost out. So the number one factor driving media, including media bias, is to keep the viewer's thumb off the remote. You have to retain viewers. As for the agenda, the way you score a successful agenda is to keep the audience angry and afraid. As long as they're in that mood, they'll stay with you. And keeping the audience is essential. So media bias does have societal consequences, as we have seen over the years, but sometimes it promotes backlash. Just these last couple of months, the question of women's sports, girls' track meets and so forth, has promoted a huge backlash. And the school board issues that I mentioned before is another example of backlash. But this is where things are. And if you remember the primary goal of advertising revenue, that will help you understand much better the way this whole thing is run. Okay, and with that, let's see if I can take off the screen. Come back to myself. I think I'm now on screen, and I want to thank all of you for your attention, and I look forward to our continuing discussion. Back to you, Sebastian.
So at this point, we're in the question and answer period. Our very own Sheila Roth will be serving as the moderator for the questions. And if you've got questions, it's appropriate at this time to drop them in the Q&A. Sheila, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian, and thank you to our presenters. This first question is directed at Dr. Redpath. He says, first, thank you for our excellent presenters. My question is, modern propaganda really seems to owe its genesis to World War I and the Creel Commission, in which Ed Bernays, the father of public relations, was involved. Bernays was related to Freud. Freudian psychology is quite a deviation from Aristotelian psychology. Why hasn't Aristotelian psychology been able to beat back this Freudian legacy over the past century? What would a recovery of Aristotelian psychology look like?
Well, I think that the Freudian comes out of Rousseau, chiefly, and we've the whole modern movement was based on a hate Aristotle psychology that was introduced into the West. Now that I've debunked Descartes, we finally, I think, with the recent publication of this, how to listen and how to speak, that's doable. But the modern philosophy, falsely so-called, as my friend John Dealey used to say, was based upon the claim that there was a hidden teaching that had been buried. This came out of the Renaissance humanism, to elevate the status of poets and rhetoricians during the Renaissance. They claimed that there was a hidden philosophy that was given by God to Moses, and it had been esoterically transmitted through the Kabbalah, and also through poets, epic poets in the West, chiefly by Homer, Hesiod, and Aeneas, the Aeneid. But only the poets knew how to read this. So the poets during the Renaissance sought to elevate their status by claiming philosophy is a hidden system, a body of knowledge, an esoteric teaching, a metaphysical and moral system. God gave it to the Jews, right? And that was esoterically transmitted through special hidden language. You see this repeated in the history of philosophy and, by different groups, like the Averroes claims that the whole of truth is contained with Islam, in the Quran, but only Aristotle knows how to read the read the Quran, right? So what you do is you capture the language game. You win the language game. Here, relating to Tom, you win the media game, right? We're the only people who know how to read, to tell you the truth. So we occupy the role of the mantis for the Oracle at Delphi. That's where the journalists for the media operate. They think that they're the mantis, and they're. So you're saying, Joe, that they're doing this through Freud, but which I think is true, to a large extent. But also they're doing it through behavior, through Skinner. Kind of Adler recognizes through kind of behavioristic psychology, and Adler realized Adler was trying to get back to a social science. He said until Adler had the key to, I think, answering your question. You have to get back to Aristotelian psychology and its influence. You have to get back to the notion that human beings possess faculties of the soul, right? And that without faculties of the soul, that essentially relate to different subjects of interest, you cannot find the methods of the sciences. Aristotle divided science up into, Aristotle's philosophy is a psychology. He extends his father's principles of medicine, from being the great medical doctor to being the great psychologist. Aristotle's politics, his ethics, they're evidently psychological. The same thing with his metaphysics. You start out, you see that his teaching is all about what people are interested in, what chiefly they're focusing their attention on, and how this is related to different faculties of the soul, right? So what happened with Descartes is he got rid of the human soul. He replaced it with mind. Some abstraction. He depersonalized philosophy. He depersonalized science, right? Scientists differ from one another because scientists have different psychological habits of wondering. Different people are interested in wondering about different kinds, different subjects of study, and what causes them to come into existence, remain in existence, perform the kinds of operations they perform, and what are the parts that are connected to the whole in which the whole exists, and how are they harmonized, right? That's the method of your science, right? You get rid of the soul, you get rid of the faculties of the soul, you have no methods of science. You've got one method, right? What's the whole of science becomes reduced to the way the mathematician imagines the universe in terms of straight lines, for example, right? And deviations from straight lines, right? You can't understand qualitative differences. Qualities are not real. Relationships are not real. How do you explain these? These are principles that have their foundation ultimately in metaphysical and psychological analysis and moral analysis. So you have to retrieve an understanding of the soul and habits of the soul and faculties. If human beings have no faculties that cause actions, how do you attribute science to the individual? That's one of the problems. St. Thomas points this out. Actually, it's where I got this notion. You divorce the human soul from science, right? And you can't explain where habits are located, right? That belong to individuals, and how the individual scientist is a scientist. You said, well, science is a method. Okay, where does the method exist? Right? It's hypothetically testing premises. That's nonsense, right? Why? Because science lies in truth. Right? Where is truth? Okay? Truth lies in intellectual judgments. You've got no intellect. You don't have the first principle of science. You get rid of the scientists, dummy. How do you think you're possibly going to explain how science is being performed? And you divorce that from association with wisdom? Right? Why do you think you've got such a mess in your culture? How can you do that? You know, you produce. Where are your leaders? Yeah, for example, leadership exists in excellence, qualitative excellence. Right? That exists in psychological habits. Right? So I think that's the answer. You know, you have to get back to the human soul, right? And you have to get back to that union of soul and body, right? That in fact, Pieper says that the human soul, even the soul, he says, is corporeal. It's a direct quote from Joseph Pieper. Even the soul, in a way, is corporeal. As Etienne Gilson says, human beings sense with their intellects, and they intellectualize with their senses. Right? The only way we can understand how human beings are in touch with the sense universe and are the subjects that we study scientifically are chiefly related to ourselves as individual knowers. It's the person who knows. Okay, it's the individual person, right? Like I see. Okay, my eyes don't see. My faculty of sight doesn't see. As an integrated unit, as a psychological unit, the psychology, as you indicate, is way off in modern times. Okay, hope I haven't talked too long about that.
Well, I would just like to say you can read more about it in Dr. Redpath's book, How to Listen and How to Speak, which is my filter's blocking. There it is, right there. Thank you, Dr. Redpath.
Yes, thank you for that answer, Doctor. I have a question for Dr. Sheahen. Might there be some media out there that is just interested in presenting information honestly to the best of their abilities, like maybe the Epoch Times?
The Weather Channel really does its best to present true information. They don't always score 100%, but that's their motivation. However, among all those who are the talking heads and deal with matters political, whether left or right, no, they don't have any complete objectivity. And the reason is that complete objectivity doesn't cause viewers to be angry and afraid. And that's a sad situation, but that is why there's so little objectivity in the media today.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sheahen. Another question for you. How do you recover if you lose your audience, or can you recover?
Well, you've seen in recent times the ratings for certain channels like CNN have been plummeting. And I don't know how they're going to do that, but they have really suffered a lot in recent months as people have turned away from them because they no longer follow the assertions, the claims, and the narrative that CNN and MSNBC too sold for a very long time. So their problem of recovery is one of probably showing things that tend to increase their credibility. Maybe a few more spokespeople coming on here and there with a conservative point of view that builds them back into a centrist viewpoint or the perception that they're centrist, and then they will hopefully recover some of their viewers. But I don't have the answer of how to do it. But again, I go back to the angry and afraid principle. I go back to Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. And I'm sure there is a way to rebuild the confidence that people have lost in you. But I don't actually know what that is. I'm sure they're experimenting with it, but I don't know what will be successful.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, can any media really be objective? Balance would be a better word to use.
Oh, yes, you can be. But the question is, how long are you going to hold your viewers? Consider PBS, Public Broadcasting System. They do not have an obligation to a profit-oriented boss, okay? Remember I said the manager's objective is, if I don't do this, they're going to find somebody else, they'll hire somebody different. That isn't the case at PBS, so PBS is freer to be objective, but they're also free to push an agenda that they prefer and a narrative that they prefer. And the only constraint upon PBS is that if they get too far off base, Congress will complain about them to some extent, and maybe their budget from the federal government will be cut. But that's a long, slow process that doesn't happen very often. But yes, it is possible to be objective, but you just have to wonder how many viewers you're going to have if you do so. If you don't worry about the number of viewers, then go ahead and be objective. Wonderful.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here's another question to both Dr. Redpath and Dr. Sheahen. I am wondering about how the conception of prudence, which Dr. Redpath described, might be applied for better outcomes by media professionals at all levels within a media organization, given the situation described by Dr. Sheahen. Number one, the financial realities of for-profit business. Number two, psychological dynamics involved in effective communication. And number three, contextual limitations, which are inherent in the form of media communication. Would you like me to repeat parts of that? It's a multi-level question.
No, it's in the question and answer section I saw.
Oh, good, good.
Why don't we let Tom, since I tend to
carry on. With it, Peter, because of the fact that their initial part of the question was more in the line of the philosophical side of media.
Okay. Prudence, according to St. Thomas, comes from the notion of providence, providentia. Yeah, it's foresight. Okay. In talking about prudence being related to docilitas or teachability, St. Thomas talks about that, by the way, in his discussion of in his treatise on law, and from the Summa, we're talking about education as a natural inclination of parents to educate their children. And he says that some children don't tend to behave too well, so at times not only do you need parents who can communicate with the children reasonably, because children tend to listen to their parents, but then there are children who don't like to listen, and you might have to give a little fatherly correction beyond simple verbal expression, and you might even have to bring in the state to help you out. Prudence is the habit of right reason. Okay, in other words, prudence is participation in divine providence, in God's wisdom. Okay, according to Aristotle and St. Thomas, all human beings are born somewhat wise, just like we're born somewhat cowardly, somewhat courageous, somewhat just, somewhat unjust, somewhat temperate, somewhat intemperate, and the person who's trained in the habit of prudence is the person who's trained in the habit of sound judgment, of being judgment in touch with reality. Right? And Tom, the emphasis that Tom talked about in advertising and in media today on anger and fear, these are related to emotional faculties that put us in touch with reality, just like hope does. And they're located in a specific faculty that St. Thomas calls particular reason, cogitative reason, where he locates common sense. As a matter of fact, he even talks about common sense in his commentary on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, being the opposite of being asinine. it's synesis, a quality called synesis, where you can size up a situation, you can judge it immediately, and he says that it's analogous to instinct in animals. Human beings have common sense, right? A practical kind of judgment. It's sharper in some people than it is in others, and it's what is morally trained, right, to get us in touch with reality. And the lower level pleasure pain appetites, which he calls concupiscible appetites, they don't put you in touch with reality. I feel pleasure, I feel pain, so forth and about that. Okay, you know that this is true, but whether that's healthy or not, that doesn't put you in touch with reality. What puts you in touch with reality is hope and fear. And anger as a reaction to hope and fear. Prudential education, is much more profitable for people in business, but you get people in business who are irrational after a while. People get under their skin. And they don't realize that they're a culture. The media is a cultural institution, right? And as I was saying, philosophy for Adler understood that philosophy is a social science. He thought he was going to reestablish this coming out of Columbia. And then he started to read Aristotle and Aquinas, and he realized they understood their understanding of scholasticism. Scholastic philosophy, that was social science, right? Because there's a twofold understanding that human beings have of science always, and of philosophy. One, that it's an act of teamwork, right? The people in physical science have retained that. The people in philosophy, after Descartes, they lost that, and they were meant to lose it, okay? So they didn't understand what the classical philosophical tradition was, right? But there's a cultural psychology that you have to respect, right? Because there's a prudential judgment that inclines you to escape from ignorance because you want to escape from slavery, right? That's what motivated the Greeks, according to Aristotle, right? And they started to wonder about the causes, of higher reality of the gods, because they recognize that higher ways of knowing, qualitatively more perfect ways of knowing, were accessible to human beings, right? To the extent that they could cooperate one with another, they could form teams. They had to be just, and they had to be prudent. So even Plato, in Book 1 of his Republic, says even a band of thieves, right, when they're robbing a whole bunch of other people, these are like the robber barons, who control the media. When they're mugging other people, they have to be just toward one another. Right? They have to band together to screw everybody else, right? But in doing it, they have to be. They can't be a rat, as we would say in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. You have to get along with other people, right? And you have to help your friends and hurt your enemies, right? The only problem with that is sometimes your enemies are good people, and your friends are bad people, right? And the net result of that is you surround yourself with enemies, right? Because you got a bunch of idiots who happen to be your friends, and you got a bunch of good people who are telling you, hey, this is the way you should be behaving. So if you lose the cultural psychology, right? Your audience has a cultural psychology. They'll put up with you for all the stupidity because you all hate somebody, or rather you've demonized somebody. Okay. So as Adam points out with respect to rhetoric, it contains three qualities that Tom is talking about: ethos, pathos, and logos. All right. You gotta present yourself as an attractive character. You gotta be likable. We don't tend to listen to people we don't like. We just turn them off. Okay, all right. Even if they sometimes will say, okay, we got to listen to this because we go with the agenda. But after a while, see, I just don't like you anymore. Right? And then then you have to keep that ethos moving with a pathos, so you have to get images, moving people to get them engaged and to get them going. You have to have that sense of the tradition. You're belonging to the tradition. Now, what Descartes did was he destroyed the tradition of philosophy. He destroyed the notion that philosophy is a kind of psychology. Science is a kind of psychology. It's a body of knowledge that you've just memorized. What the heck? How does that make you? How does that make you scientific? How does that make you a genius? The fact that your head is stuffed with facts, right? That you've memorized like a robot, right? It's precisely because of your individual genius, your qualitative psychological faculties, that you've been able to think this stuff up. That makes you worthy of praise and so forth. Well, this is something you authored, right? And you did that as part of a culture, right? So without maintaining the notion of science as teamwork, historical teamwork, and we've got two different understandings of science and philosophy here. One, an individual operation, but operation within the team. Well, if you're a hot dog and you're destroying the team, get the hell off the team. Once you realize that, this is where we've come to, right? You can't destroy the notion of science being rooted in culture, right? And in the pursuit of qualitatively more perfect human activities. You do that, and you get rid of. It's like saying this. I'm a member of a sports team at football. The whole of sports is football. So I don't care about the principles of athletics. I don't care of anything like that. The professionalism. There's no moral culture. What do you mean there's no moral culture? What are you, an idiot? You have to have friends that are helping you out. You have to get along with other people. You can't just, say, I'm a member of the orchestra, but I'm just going to play all, I don't have to listen to anybody else. I don't have to modify me. I'm the whole team. Okay. You'll ruin any organization to the extent that you've got that kind of psychology. Right? So.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I have another question. She says, I think we haven't really spoken to the issue of manipulation of faith and science. How have recent books such as Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great and Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion contributed to shifting the balance of the scales of people who believe and the people who don't? How have these books manipulated science to influence faith communities and possibly make the world somewhat godless?
Well, I think that this has been a good example of the way media bias does affect people. Both Dawkins and Hitchens make assertions about what somebody said about science as contrasted to making scientific assertions. And people who have looked carefully at it, a British guy named Alistair McGrath wrote a book called The Dawkins Delusion, talking about how Dawkins was deluded. But it didn't get the kind of attention on the media that Dawkins got in the first place. I can remember 5 or 8 years ago, Bill O'Reilly on Fox News was very popular, and he'd have Dawkins on a couple times, not every month, but several times a year, to kind of give Dawkins a forum, but maybe to create a little controversy and get some conversation going. But Dawkins had good media presence, and that really helped sell his points of view. The fact that it was erroneous and wasn't the real science that he was talking about and alleging to represent was, from the media point of view, secondary. The audience is passive. They just wanted to sit back and listen to somebody, and Dawkins had a good presence on TV. So that kind of thing works, it sells because of the way he conveyed thoughts, and the fact that the content was erroneous didn't matter at all to the people putting it on, the media, and didn't matter very much to the audience either. because, as I said, the audience is passive. Guy comes home from work, oh, I'm tired, and flip on the TV and watch evening news. He doesn't want to have any demands put on him. He just wants to be passive and receive information. And by golly, Dawkins looked pretty good on television. So that worked.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sheahen. Another question, and it comes from me as well as somebody else. I have my fourth child going off to college in a couple of months. She's going to a state university. At her high school graduation, our pastor gave a very nice talk with some advice, and he told the graduates to question everything. And so this person, another attendee here, asked, what is the role of educating individuals starting from youth to be skeptical about media bias and discerning more balanced view?
I'll tell you how I did it in my family. My children were teenagers. Every day I would lay the Washington Post and the Washington Times alongside each other. We lived in the Washington suburbs. And the Washington Post had the left point of view, the Washington Times had the right point of view. And I'd said to the kids, read both stories. They're side by side, read them both. And then you will understand what media do, and it'll cause you to think about where is the reality. Not necessarily exactly in the middle, in between, but it'll make you think about it. And that is, I think, a valuable strategy for a parent to do with regard to getting their children to think.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Another question for you, Dr. Sheahen. This will be probably the last question. Just as many of us yearn for centrists among our political candidates, we also yearn for Cronkite, Murrow, Howard K. Smith centrist anchors and network news broadcasts. Do you think we will ever see such an approach to network news again during our lifetimes? And he says he's 61 years old.
Well, I'm older than him, and therefore my expectations for my lifetime are lower than his could be. But I would think that somewhere in the college age of people, there will be enough people rising up against the ablum they've been fed that they will eventually produce somebody who's genuinely trustworthy. I can hope and pray for that outcome, but I certainly can't either guarantee it or even predict the timeline for it.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Dr. Redpath, did you have something that you wanted to contribute to that?
I wanted to lower my hand there.
Well, that's okay. I thought you had your hand raised.
No, I had it up by accident. But the only thing I could add to that is that you can't have your educational institutions that are using the model of the Enlightenment to be able to inculcate the truths of Western culture and Catholicism. The biggest problem I have. I went to SUNY Buffalo. I was surrounded by Marxists. I never took a course on Aquinas, aside from one undergraduate with Larry Azo, which I didn't really learn too much from. Aside from Larry, who was terrific and a genius. As one of my friends quotes from people in Maine says, is you can't get there from here. Okay, if you have this systematic understanding of learning that is spread throughout contemporary colleges and universities, and even goes back to grammar school with the fact opinion distinction and the whole of truth lies in physical science, you don't have this. You don't have a proper classical understanding of the way science exists in antiquity, inculcated in your approach, you're gonna wind up the same place, with your enemies. The problem I have with, most of the time is not with Marxists or I have no trouble talking to these people and conversing with them. I have trouble with talking with Thomists who don't really know what the heck St. Thomas is talking about, which are 99% of them, and yet they think they are. And I have to fix all the stupid mistakes that they put into the mind of students. So Catholic education, for example, is a total mess. So largely pretty much all educational institutions. Adler was convinced you have to get rid of pretty much all of them, which is why I'm starting my own. The Common Sense Wisdom Liberal Arts Academy and a Common Sense Wisdom Executive Coaching Academy to try to remedy that problem.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Mahfood, who is going to start to wrap things up.
All right, first I'd like to very much thank Sheila Roth for running the question and answer period. That was very excellent work on your part, Sheila. Thank you. And our presenters, Dr. Tom Sheahen and Dr. Peter Redpath, for their presentations and for their very informative responses to the Q&A. And then to the audience that's participating, I'd like to say, when you registered for this webinar, you went to our ITEST website at www.faithscience.org. We invite you to go back and to check out more features on that website, including past webinars, publications, and how to join ITEST as a regular member. You'll find that our next event has already been scheduled for July 31st, 2021, on the fallen angel model, which is a proposed connection between an event described by science and an ancient revelation. It'll be presented by Joe Provenzano, Deacon Ron Morgan, and Dan Provenzano, and you can find more information about it at faithscience.org/FAM for Fallen Angel Model /FAM. So I'd like to thank all of you for attending, and I hope this event has been a valuable learning experience for you. I'd now like to call upon Sister Carla Mae Streeter, a member of the ITEST board, to conclude with our closing prayer.
You need to
please unmute Sister Carla Mae.
Thank you, Sebastian. Let's have just a moment of quiet. Most Holy One, thank you for the wisdom shared here today. I have made a discovery. I am a primary media. I have power in the workplace, in the office, in the church, in my house. I've come to a frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the workplace, in my house, in my church, in my business. It's my daily mood that makes the weather. As an employee or employer, parent, friend, teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a person's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it's my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a person humanized or dehumanized. And so, kind God, let us pray now, each of us by quietly responding, Lord, deliver us. from the personal bias that prompts me to assert that I'm always right, that I don't need to listen. From the group bias that prompts me to assert that my race, my gender, my nation, my religion, my company is always right. And we don't need to listen. We don't need to wonder. From the unwillingness to question or critique any data given to me. From the wounds of addiction or abuse, verbal, physical, psychological, social, or religious, that prompt us to avoid an honest quest to find the truth. For all of these biased conditions, Lord, deliver us. Lord, kindly deliver us. Amen.
Thank you, Sister Carla May. And with that, that's the presentation. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll hope to see you next time.